Imagine that if in the 90s the Soviet Union did not fall, and the late Soviet Union's policies of openness continued into the 21st century. That's basically Transnistria. Fun fact, they're the last country that declares independence to have the hammer and sickle on their flag. Transnistria, locally known as Transnistria, is a breakaway region of the recognized Moldovan Republic. Moldova is a country in Europe with the least amount of tourists and the least known country in that continent. The English name Transnistria comes from the word trans, which means across, and Dniester, which is a river that borders Moldova and Transnistria. So literally across the Dniester River. The name Transnistria can be offensive to some locals because it reminds them of the times during World War II when the Nazi Romanians occupied their land. Hundreds of thousands of Jews and other European people died there in camps killed by Nazis. In English, they generally prefer the names Transnistria and Transnistria, but generally they just want you to refer to their place as Transnistria, which is the Russian word that they use in their area. The history of the area is pretty similar to Moldova's. It started with the ancient Greeks colonizing the local tribes, and then the Romans came in, and then there were Turkic nomads, then a Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth ruled the area for a while, then the Ottoman Empire, then the Russian Empire, then it was part of the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic under the Soviet Union, and then it was put into the Moldovan Socialist Republic after World War II, and then once Moldova declared independence from the Soviet Union, it declared itself independent from Moldova, and that's where it is today. In 1991, when the USSR fell, there was much civil unrest in Europe. This started in the late 80s and continued until the USSR fell and the former republics became their own independent states. But Moldova was a bit different. They had an entire war where about 1,000 people died due to the breakup of the Soviet Union. This war started in 90 and there was a ceasefire called in 92, but as I said, 1,000 people died in the midst of that war. The tensions behind the war started even before Moldova was part of the Soviet Union. Before World War II, Transnistria was part of the Soviet Union, and Moldova was part of a Romanian-speaking country. In the middle of World War II, the Romanians, who were allied with the Nazis, not very well known, invaded the Soviet Union, and the first place they invaded was Transnistria. As I said before, hundreds of thousands of Jews and Gypsies and other people that the Nazis deemed unfit for general society were forced into Transnistria, and hundreds of thousands were killed there. After World War II ended, Transnistria, which was part of the Soviet Union, and Moldova, which was part of the greater Romanian area, were slapped into one country, or one republic of the Soviet Union, and it became its own SSR, the Moldovan Soviet Socialist Republics. The Transnistrians, for the last 100 years, or basically since the Soviet Union started, have always had a pretty deep reverence for Russia and the Soviet Union. So that's why when Moldova declared independence from the USSR, when the USSR fell, they wanted to continue to be with the USSR. So basically they said, we don't want to go with Moldova, we want to go with the USSR. So that's why they declared independence from Moldova. The Transnistrian War was not a full-on war like World War II, but there were definitely skirmishes, bombs, tanks, and planes were all used to try to, defeat the enemy. There were significant clashes between both sides, but in the end, Transnistria did basically win the war because Moldova does not have any governments in Transnistria. Historically, Transnistria was part of the Ukrainian SSR and then the Moldovan SSR. Now it is its own thing. No one recognizes it, but basically it's its own thing, and with heavily relied on Russia. The country is a presidential democracy, and the president can be elected to 2 5-year terms. The current president's name is Vadim Krasnoselsky, I think. Something like that, it's on screen. The Supreme Council is the sole legislature. It's made up of 43 elected officials, but they are elected to 1 5-year term. As a democracy, they do hold elections. However, many in the West do not see them as fully free and fair elections due to a candidate being forced to register only days before the election. So basically, he only had a few days to campaign. So basically, he could only campaign for a few days, and therefore, he probably wouldn't win the election. The Pridnestrovian military is also a thing that exists. They're about 25,000 strong. They have some old Soviet tanks. They use mostly Russian guns and things given to them by Russia. After the Transnistrian War, the military was pretty much set in place, and everything was kind of ready to go. There are 7 districts of Transnistria. 2 are cities, and 5 are regions. These regions and cities are similar to probably the size and the population of American counties. They are called Kamencia, Tabarsi, Grigorispol, Solbozia, and Ribnita. I guarantee you I butchered most of those. There are 3 odd parts of Transnistria. The first one is in the Tabarsi area. 2 parts of this district that border the river are actually administered and controlled by Moldova. They are technically on the Pridnestrovian side of the river, but they are still loyal to Moldova, and they still are basically part of Moldova. They're just on the side of Transnistria. So kind of gets a little complicated. There's been a few clashes, but no one has died. Another odd part of Transnistria is the city of Bender. It is on the western part of the river, which is technically the Moldovan side, but it is basically Transnistria. It's administered by Transnistria. It's inside Transnistria's borders with border crossings and everything. So it's on the Moldovan side of the river, but it's just basically part of Transnistria. Last but not least is a little part of the district of Slobozia. It is on the eastern side, but it is administered by Moldova, kind of like the parts in the Tabarsi district. As you can see, the river is the general boundary between the 2 areas, but there are still a few parts where it's not exactly how you'd expect it to be. The economy of Pridnestroia is a mixed economy. After the USSR fell, most of its industries were privatized. The economy is based on a mix of heavy industry, mostly steel production, also electricity generation, and general manufacturing. This all accounts for about 80% of the total industrial output. Pridnestroia also has its own central bank, and it also gives us its own currency, called the ruble, based on the Russian ruble. It is convertible to other currencies, however, it is only legal tender in Transnistria, and if you're outside Transnistria, good luck giving it to anyone because no one's going to want it except for a souvenir. Unfortunately, because of Pridnestroia's political unrecognition and general instability, it is also a hotbed for smugglers and traffickers and people doing generally illegal activities. The Transnistrian government has been accused by the West by, kind of being part of this, getting a cut of the money, etc. Obviously, Ukraine and Russia and Moldova also deny this, and of course the Transnistrian government also denies this, but, it's complicated with all this kind of stuff. Over the last 10 years, the government of Pridnestroia has cracked down on this illegal stuff, and it's definitely happening a lot less now than it was 10 to 20 years ago. During the USSR, Pridnestroia accounted for about 40% of all of Moldova SSR's GDP, even though it only considered for about 17% of the population. They also produced most of the Moldovan SSR's electricity. Since it's not a recognized country, getting accurate economic info is very difficult, if not impossible. In 2007 was the last year that I could find a GDP for the entire country. It was about 800 million United States dollars. When divided by the population, which at the time was about 500,000, that comes out to about $1,500 per person per year. An updated number, which was given to me in the late 2010s, for a GDP per person is about $2,600. And that is definitely an increase since 2007, which is good. However, it's still not a ton of money at all. Their wages are low, but when you buy stuff there, obviously it's much cheaper than here in the West. You can get a pound of rice or potatoes for about 30 cents. You can get a local transportation cost, like a train or a trolley or something, or a bus for about 30 cents. Rent and utilities are about $150 a month, and everything else kind of figures itself out. Shut up. Based on the numbers I could find, the average salary of $223 a month, you could live a comfortable life. Of course, these numbers may be way off. I'm simply trying to give you an idea of the economic situation in this area. Its economy is also directly affected by anything that Russia, Ukraine, or Moldova does. They're basically at the mercies of these other countries to continue trading with them. In 2018, Ukraine almost stopped trading food and stuff with them, and they almost had a mini famine type thing. Moldova, a completely recognized country, has the least tourism in Europe. Transnistria has even less. Getting into Transnistria is pretty easy. They'll give you a little card, and it will you basically keep onto it until you leave. It's basically like your local passport type thing. The border guards resemble the KGB. They have got the hammer and sickle and everything, and they'll usually ask for a bribe. However, if you know some Russian and you can explain the bribing is completely illegal even to their government, they'll probably let you go. Another tourism tip is to not call it Transnistria. Call it Transnistria. That is the official word that they use in their language, which is mostly Russian. It is also the last place in the world that actively celebrates its Soviet past. You can see a head of Lenin in the main square. There's a tank also in the main square. You'll see the hammer and sickle everywhere. They've got Soviet-themed restaurants and all kinds of stuff. But get there quickly because they are rapidly growing and expanding, and the current administration wants to more celebrate its Russian history from the Russian Empire more than the Soviet Union. The last census, which took place in 2014, had the population at about 475,000 people. This is down 14% from the one done 10 years before in 2004. Either there's been a lot of emigration out of Transnistria, or old people are dying faster than new people are being. Most likely it's a combination of these two things. The rate of urbanization, which is basically people living in cities, is 69%. Nice. And 31% live in rural. The largest ethnic groups last polled in 2015 were about 161,000 Russians, which makes 34%, 156,000 Moldovans, 33%, and 126,000 Ukrainians, which is about 26%. Bulgarians, the Geguts, local minority, and Belarusians and Germans accounted for the rest of the percentage populations. Official stats show that about 91% of the Transnistrian population are Eastern Orthodox Christians, with 4% adhering to Roman Catholicism. There are also other small beliefs, Protestantism, a few Jews, some atheists, but that's basically how the religion looks in this area. Unlike the Soviet Union, Transnistria's government does support the restoration and construction of Eastern Orthodox churches, and it also affirms the freedom of religion for about 114 different religious groups. However, some small groups like the Jehovah's Witness and some Protestants have had trouble officially getting recognized in the country. The official languages of this area of the world are Russian, Moldovan, and Ukrainian. They follow closely with the three main ethnicities, Russian, Moldovan, and Ukrainian. Transnistria is a really interesting place if you care about Soviet history and the oddities of different areas around the world. One day, hopefully, it'll be recognized as its own nation or part of a different nation that the people do want to be a part of. Stay tuned, this weird part of Russia, which is not actually in Russia, called Kaliningrad, is coming up next.